The attack on technology is being put over on you by means of a package deal tied together by strings called ecology. Let us examine the arguments of the ecologists. Their motives will become clear as we go along. Under the title, The Ravaged Environment, a survey of the ecological crusade was published in Newsweek magazine on January 26, 1970. In spite of, or perhaps because of its sympathy with that crusade, it is an accurate survey. It captures the movement's essence, spirit, and epistemological style. The survey begins by declaring that man, quote, has come face to face with a new man-made peril, the poisoning of his natural environment with noxious doses of chemicals, garbage, fumes, noise, sewage, heat, ugliness, and urban overcrowding, close quote. Observe the odd disparity of the things listed as perils. Noxious chemicals along with noise and ugliness. This mixture occurs in all the arguments of the ecologists. We shall discuss its motives later. The perils the survey keeps stressing are not merely local but global. They affect the whole of the earth and threaten the survival of all living species. What kinds of examples are given, and on the grounds of what evidence? Quote, in the shallow waters of the Pacific Ocean off Los Angeles, sea urchins, a small sea animal, are enjoying a population boom thanks to the organic materials in sewage being washed out to sea. Normally, the sea urchin's population levels are tied to the quantity of kelp on the ocean bottoms. The animals die off when they have eaten all the kelp, thus allowing new crops of the seaweed to grow. But now that the sewage is available to nourish the sea urchins, the kelp beds have not had a chance to recover. In many places, the kelp, for which man has found hundreds of uses, it is an ingredient of salad dressing and beer, has disappeared altogether. There is, of course, no way of calculating the exact effects of the loss of kelp on its particular ecosystem. Close quote. An ecosystem is defined as, quote, the sum total of all the living and non-living parts that support the chain of life within a selected area, unquote. How do the ecologists select this area? How do they determine its interrelationship with the rest of the globe, and over what period of time? No answer is given. Another example, quote, right now, some ecologists are worried about the possible effect on the Eskimo of the great oil race on Alaska's remote North Slope. Oil spills in the ever-frozen sea, they fear, would be trapped in the narrow space between water and ice, killing first the plankton, then the fish and mollusks that feed on the plankton, then the polar bears, walrus, seals, and whales that feed off sea life, and finally threatening the Eskimos who live off these animals. The net outcome of the current research, hopefully, will be a better understanding of the potential consequences of man's tampering with any ecosystem, unquote. Consider the actual consequences of this particular example. Without any effort on their part, the Eskimos are to receive fortunes in oil royalties, which will enable them to give up their back-breaking struggle for mere subsistence and to discover the comfort of civilized life and labor. If, and it is only an if, the ecologists' fears came true, the Eskimos would have the means to move to a better background. Or are we to assume that the Eskimos prefer their way of life to ours? If so, why are they entitled to a preference, but we are not? Or shall we assume that the Eskimos have inalienable rights but Thomas Edison did not? Or are the Eskimos to be sacrificed to the polar bears, walruses, seals, and whales, which are to be sacrificed to the fish and mollusks, which are to be sacrificed to the plankton? If so, why? But we will come back to these questions later. Quote, non-human environments, the survey declares, have a remarkable resiliency. As many as 25 or even 50% of a certain fish or rodent population might be lost in a habitat during a plague or a disaster, yet the species will recover its original strengths within 1 or 2 years. It's man-made interference or pollution that can profoundly disturb the ecosystem and its equilibrium, unquote. Bear this in mind. Factories represent pollution. Plagues do not. Quote, the worst fears of land conservationists concern not the accidental spoilage of land by waste, but its exploitation by man to build mines, roads, and cities. In time, he may encroach so far on his greenery that he reduces the amount of air he has to breathe, unquote. Have you ever looked at a map of the globe and compared the size of the area of industrial sites and cities to the size of the area of untouched wilderness and primeval jungles? And what about the greenery cultivated by man? What about the grains, the fruit trees, the flowers that would have vanished long ago without human care and labor? What about the giant irrigation projects that transform deserts into fertile green lands? No answer. Quote, Louisiana's state bird, the brown pelican, has vanished from its shores, the survey laments, blaming the bird's extinction on DDT. The dinosaur and his fellow creatures vanished from this earth long before there were any industrialists or any men, and environmental resiliency never brought them back. But this did not end life on Earth. Contrary to the ecologists, nature does not stand still and does not maintain the kind of equilibrium that guarantees the survival of any particular species, least of all, the survival of her greatest and most fragile product, man.